A very warm welcome to all of you joining us. We're slowly starting, but we'll let everyone come in first. I'm very happy to see so many participants. Bienvenidos. Si necesitan traducción al español, lo pueden hacer haciendo clic al globo interpretación. So I think we can start. Yes, very warm welcome to all of you to today's discussion in our new series of the name Resisting the Anti-Gender Agenda, Reviving Reproductive Justice. My name is Daria Wienischek. I'm the director of the Global Unit for Feminism and Gender Democracy at the Heinrich-Böll Foundation. I'm very happy that we will start today with this discussion series. I'll give you a very short intro before I hand over to my colleague Naida, who put this amazing series together for us. Actors and movements that attack human rights and feminist achievements are no longer an isolated phenomena, I would say. They are part of our new reality and they will shape our futures, sadly. On top of that, they are transnationally connected and very well funded, much better funded than a lot of feminist movements. These actors promote traditional gender roles. They spread hate against queer people and attack abortion rights. And they are slowly but steadily taking over parties and governments. We have all seen the latest example of this last week when a misogynist, racist, that normalizes rape got elected president of the United States of America. And we have seen this also in other elections this year. Us at the Global Unit, we are talking a lot to our partner organizations and feminist networks, and we can already see the destructive effects that these right-wing shifts can have on grassroots organizations and vulnerable communities. And none of this comes as a surprise for us or for other feminist actors. These anti-gender actors, they act in very predictable ways. They have a playbook almost, it seems. And the first point of attack is usually reproductive and queer rights. And this is exactly why any effort to protect our democracies and human rights have to center exactly those actors that are the first to be attacked, that are on the front lines of reproductive justice and queer rights, because they are the ones that defend our democracies. So this is why we're doing this whole series. And today we kick it off with focusing and zooming into the topic of reproductive justice. And I'm honored and excited that we will start today by learning from our panelists about their resistance strategies. And I'm very much looking forward to a lively debate. I'm very thankful for my colleague Naida that put this series together, and I'm handing over to you. And I wish us all a very productive and inspiring discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Daria. Hello, everybody. I hope everybody is safe and sound and well, and thank you for taking your time to join us. I'm Naida Puchikalic, and I'm coming also from Global Unit for Feminism and Gender Democracy. We're based in Sarajevo, and I will be moderating this talk today. You can write in the chat, where are you coming from? Where are you watching us from? So as Daria said, today we will be talking about something that is very urgent and global concern, which is this exactly impact of the anti-gender and anti-feminist influence on the reproductive health and rights, but overall bodily autonomy of an individual. And we always know it always sits first the marginalized among us. We also have to say, and I have to say, that while we talk and have this conversation, we are very much aware of the severe lack of access of the essential reproductive healthcare services in war-torn zones. We think of Sudan, we think of Congo, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, and numerous other communities and places. The same from the second wave feminism, personal as political, is relevant now, I think, maybe more than ever. And this is why today we focus on the troubling regression of reproductive freedoms across various regions. And we will see how to stay resilient in order to counteract and to do it actually effectively. So if we look from Latin America to Europe and beyond that, of course, as Daria said, anti-feminist, conservative, far-right movements, they all come together, they work together, they're gaining influence, especially in this election year, which is coming to an end soon. There are still some elections that are going to be held, and we already know the impact of those elected that will happen globally, especially for vulnerable communities. So they, by using their power, they aim to shift policies and reverse these hard-won feminist gains in reproductive justice and bodily autonomy. This directly threatens safe, legal, and health-free access to reproductive justice. But it is also an opening door for shrinking democracy, for other restrictions of human rights, and also structural erosion of democratic, not only institutions, but also processes with having these people in power. However, what history has taught us and what we have seen, and there are some very good examples, when we're faced with dark times like these, grassroots activism tends to rise. And if you recall, we don't have to go back to second wave feminism. If we think just recently from the Me Too movement and Black Lives Matter and successful community grassroots campaigns to decriminalize abortion in Latin America, this gives us hope, and we still believe in the power of social movements, of advocacy and policy lobbying for something that could be lasting change, actually. So I'm happy that today we gathered two very prominent speakers who are with us, Ruth Zurbriggen and Lena Dahn, who will bring invaluable insights from the front lines of this issue. So we have two continents, two very different experiences, and two generations of feminists, if I may put it in this way. Ruth has been a powerful advocate for reproductive justice, not only in Argentina, but in Latin America and Caribbean, where restrictive policies and political shifts have intensified, unfortunately, in the past year. And Lena, on the other hand, brings us a critical perspective from Germany on how these same anti-gender trends are impacting Europe and what does it mean for the future of democracy and all of us. Reproductive justice laws, and I will finish with this, policies, health systems, and practices, they must be based on human rights and social justice and the needs of all people. If it's not inclusive, it's not for all. And this discussion, the first one in the series, is a small contribution just to shed a light on these challenges that we as feminists are facing once again, while we also stand in solidarity with all affected communities and individuals. So today we discuss the challenges. We also explore new and old strategies for community building and how do we sharpen our resilience for the days to come. I'm very happy to have, and I want to thank our office, newly established office in Argentina, Gabriela and Gabriela's team for connecting us with Ruth Zurbriggen, which is very, Ruth has immense biography. I will share just a few pieces of it. You can read the rest in the chat and we will share the links afterwards. And as you know, this is all recorded. But I have to say that Ruth is a feminist, activist, professor and researcher, and a very strong voice in the struggle for women's rights and diversity in Argentina and Latin America. Almost 25 years ago, Ruth was one of the founders of the collective La Revuelta, and from there, the whole federal network of organizations, more than 50 organizations, was established. And they work to assist pregnant people to have access to safe abortion. They also work and advocate and gather professionals from the fields of law, education, healthcare, for those who are experiencing gender-based violence. What is also interesting, that Ruth is pioneer in the promoting and implementation of the comprehensive sex education, which will be very interesting for our talks, since now we have Javier Milei in power and what is his stance on sex education and some other things. And also, of course, it's interesting fact that this law on sex education has reduced involuntary pregnancy in youth by up to 50%. So it works. That method works. And also, among other things, Ruth was one of the Anna Klein Award nominees. So Ruth, I'm happy to have you from Argentina. Buenos dias, buenos tardes. I don't know what time is exactly there. Thank you for being with us. In short, I would like you just to give us a context of not only
Muchísimas gracias. Acá es el mediodía.
Thank you.
Bueno,
So my question would be, as we said, personal is political. And now, current president of Argentina, Javier Milei, will be in December, I think, 1 year that he is in power. And what's interesting is how has this recent election influenced the discourse around reproductive rights and women's bodily autonomy, having in mind that he won after Fernandez, who was progressive, who made some laws to come to power. And if general audience can remember, who was following the politics, especially, that Javier had many promises of all the ministries he is going to close. Ministry for Gender, no sex education, no gender studies, no money for abortions, etc. So my question to you would be, what is the situation now in Argentina? And if you could briefly say about Latin America in general, and what are the strategies that they used? Why did Milei win?
bueno, voy a tratar de responder a esas dos enormes preguntas. Quiero primero agradecer esta posibilidad. Me parece que es muy importante que dialoguemos de manera transfronteriza y que abramos también bueno, nuestros sentidos y que nos dispongamos, ¿no? a aprender también de otras experiencias y de pensamientos que nos pueden ayudar a sobrevivir en este tiempo, pero a sobrevivir haciendo, ¿no? Una sobrevivencia que tiene que ver con nuestras pasiones, nuestros deseos, no es una sobrevivencia estática a la que me refiero con la idea de sobrevivir. Me gustaría empezar diciendo que, o reafirmando algo que seguramente las personas que están aquí saben, que el gobierno de Javier Milei es parte de una expresión global de avances de un proyecto de ultraderecha, neoliberal, ultraconservador. Es un proyecto de restauración patriarcal, antidemocrático, autoritario, racista, cruel, dañino, ¿no? Me parece que es importante pensar a este proyecto político enmarañado en otros procesos a nivel global, porque si no corremos riesgos, me parece, si lo pensamos solo como una expresión de lo nacional. Tiene su singularidad, por supuesto, esa expresión, pero es una expresión que va más allá de este país. Todo lo que propone el gobierno de Javier Milei a partir de esas primeras apreciaciones que dije antes en materia de derechos, sean cuales sean los derechos a los que nos refiramos, es profundamente regresivo. Y cuando se trata de los derechos sexuales, los derechos reproductivos, no reproductivos, cuando se trata de las autonomías corporales, me parece que se acentúan visiones de mundo profundamente patriarcales que también están atados a los conservadurismos religiosos, por supuesto, ¿no? Encarna, podríamos decir, este gobierno la cara más visible y retrógrada de un sueño que tienen, podríamos decir, los machistas de este mundo, y es el deseo de volver a un orden patriarcal heteronormativo en el que los varones o cierta clase de varones se sientan muy, muy seguros de ejercer poder, control y disciplinamiento, ¿no? es un deseo de volver a eso. Y entonces ese deseo de volver a eso también nos está hablando de lo mucho que hicimos para salir de ese lugar, ¿no? A lo largo de décadas y décadas de organización feminista. Y me preguntabas ahí también por qué ganó, ¿no? ¿Por qué ganó? ¿Por qué le ganó a una gestión que se ubica dentro del campo del progresismo, podríamos decir, ¿no? Y la verdad que creo que todavía nos faltan muchos elementos para dar respuestas, aunque algunos elementos tenemos, pero creo que hay cosas que nos resultan tan vergonzantes, a la vez tan dolorosas, que a veces estamos aturdidas para dar esas respuestas, ¿no? De por qué ganó. En principio, me parece que parte de lo que nos dificulta esa respuesta es el aturdimiento por la magnitud del triunfo, ¿no? Creo que ahí hay un elemento que nos hace estar todavía así, con esa sensación de aturdimiento, porque fue un triunfo extremadamente contundente en relación a la cantidad de votos, ¿no? Y me parece que sobre los feminismos tiene como una especie de efecto de golpe, ¿no? Sentimos esa violencia, sentimos enojo, ¿no? Y mucha intranquilidad, por supuesto, y como dije antes, vergüenza. A mí me da mucha vergüenza que este país esté gobernado por semejante espacio político, ¿no? Pero a la vez me parece que tenemos mucha rabia también que nos mueve, ¿no? Y que esa rabia nos incita a pensar, a proyectar, para saber cómo y por dónde va este escenario que se está, bueno, dibujando en Argentina. Creo que uno de los motivos de por qué ganó es la falta de respuesta de los gobiernos de tinte popular, como puede haber sido el de Alberto Fernández, a las necesidades básicas de amplios sectores de la población, los procesos inflacionarios de nunca acabar en este país. Diría que también las humillaciones sociales a las que la gestión de Alberto Fernández sometió a muchos sectores, sobre todo durante el COVID, durante la pandemia de COVID-19, también es un tema para poner en el debate a la hora de pensar por qué ganó. Las innumerables deudas que tienen los procesos democráticos abiertos en América Latina, que además son deudas porque estos procesos democráticos tienen un tinte muy autoritario todavía, poco participativo, muy clientelar, con problemas de sexismo, de racismo, de corrupción, de desigualdad extrema también, ¿no? Generan procesos de desigualdad. Hay que preguntarse cómo es que caló con todo esas problemáticas vinculadas a la inflación, a la economía, a la pobreza. ¿Cómo es que caló tanto el discurso de la mano dura para resolver los problemas de la inseguridad cotidiana que también se sintieron y se sienten en este país? Una inseguridad que también es producida por el avance del narcotráfico y todas esas redes, por la inestabilidad que eso crea, como la sensación de vivir en una especie de caos permanente, ¿no? Esa sensación de caos, de problemas, de inseguridad, me parece que llevan a que muchos sectores encuentren en los discursos de la mano dura, del individualismo, del sálvese quien pueda, de más cárceles, más policías, más punitivismo para resolver estos problemas. Y entonces ahí se arma un combo perfecto, me parece, para que Milei capitalice con esa performance de la motosierra y el individualismo a ultranza, ¿no? Para ir como dando paso por ahí a otra pregunta, me parece que es importante señalar, o al menos lo vemos así en los análisis que hacemos entre algunas y algunos compañeros feministas, que Javier Milei es un proceso electoral, pero a la vez es mucho más que eso, ¿no? Me parece que sería equivocado pensar que solo es un proceso electoral. Me parece que capitaliza un descontento social que estaba ahí, listo, listo, como agazapado, ¿no? Para expresarse a través del voto de Javier Milei, pero que a la vez genera tentáculos, digo yo, de atracción un poco más profunda que el voto, que permea subjetividades esa salida del mundo y que esta avanzada se convierte en una plataforma donde se regocijan y se juntan quienes consideran que la vida depende centralmente de los esfuerzos individuales y del sacrificio individual para que estemos mejor, ¿no? Me parece a la vez que el fenómeno de Javier Milei es un fenómeno vengativo. Me parece que también hay que hablar de las venganzas que están trayendo estos sectores y que gozan con esa venganza que están haciendo. Cuando digo venganza, voy a poner un ejemplo. El vocero presidencial de apellido Adorni, que ante la primer marcha universitaria en defensa de la universidad pública, que fue una marcha muy, muy, muy masiva en abril de este año, que continuó con nuevas marchas y reclamos, pero que concitó una defensa en la calle muy importante porque en todo caso lo que está mostrando es que la universidad pública es un bien común en este país, ¿no? Y que hay amplios sectores dispuestos a movilizarse. Pero decía, el vocero presidencial diciendo, se acabó la historia de que el hijo del peón puede ser médico, ¿no? El hijo del peón, el trabajador de campo, el trabajador rural, el hijo del albañil, de la empleada doméstica. Me parece que eso habla de la venganza que están tratando de producir, ¿no? Por eso nos aturdimos tanto también y en gran medida buscan, además de destruir, provocarnos constantemente. El 8 de marzo, cuando nos movilizábamos en las calles de este país, convocadas desde los feminismos, el gobierno decide cambiar los nombres de todas las salas de la Casa de Gobierno que llevaban nombres de mujeres, ¿no? Es una provocación constante que busca justamente desmoralizarnos y frustrarnos, y entonces ahí estamos andando la vida y surfeando la ola. Insisto, no es un fenómeno solamente electoral, y si lo vemos así, me parece que vamos a errarle a las estrategias que tenemos que seguir armando para empujar otras posibilidades. Y lo digo porque justamente anoche, mirando un programa de debate político, escuchaba a un dirigente peronista de este país, del partido donde podemos ubicar a Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, a Néstor Kirchner, bueno, a Sergio Massa, a muchos otros, ¿no? Pero este dirigente decía y hablaba de todo lo que iban a tener que hacer dentro de 4 años cuando ganen el gobierno. Y ya pensaba qué leyes. Y a mí me parece que es un problema pensar así, cuando además todavía la clase política de este país, que perdió las elecciones, no dio respuestas sobre las responsabilidades que tiene en relación a eso, ¿no? O sea, no hizo ningún balance crítico. Entonces, me parece importante mirarlo como algo que va más allá de una expresión electoral. Y las estrategias que tienen, bueno, reivindican un proyecto autoritario mucho más amplio, se dedican a crear enemigos públicos, esos enemigos públicos somos los feminismos, los transfeminismos, pero también son los pueblos originarios, también son los movimientos ambientalistas, también son los movimientos sociales, ¿no? Y por supuesto, deliberadamente y acaloradamente incita a la sociedad en contra de los feminismos. No es casual. Estigmatizar, criminalizar, infundir miedos, odios, transmitir pánicos. Se dedican a transmitir pánicos morales y sexuales por doquier. Señalan a las disidencias sexuales y de género como el gran peligro contra la humanidad. Y para la continuidad del mundo hay un discurso vinculado a eso y que entonces, si se nos señala como una fuerza destructiva del mundo que sueñan para volver a esos valores de la familia nuclear, entonces, ¿por qué habría que reconocernos derechos, ¿no? ¿Por qué habría que reconocernos algún tipo de derechos si quienes nos agrupamos en todos estos movimientos venimos a querer destruirles ese mundo ideal que sueñan y que no existe tampoco ni existirá, en definitiva? ¿Por qué reconocernos derechos? Digo yo, si vendríamos a provocar el fin del mundo en los términos que estos sectores definen el mundo, ¿no? Por otro lado, creo que dentro de las estrategias cuentan con un complot de las élites para imponer sus valores a la gente corriente, ¿no? A la gente común, como dice Judith Butler. Niegan las desigualdades de género y entre los géneros, niegan las violencias machistas, niegan el patriarcado, niegan la catástrofe climática a la que nos empujan estos modos de producción extractivistas y de vinculación con los territorios. Niegan las estadísticas, niegan los estudios, niegan las investigaciones que ponen en evidencia que nuestras causas son justas. Y todo esto lo hacen en términos discursivos, ¿no? Y de amenazar, pero también todo esto tiene efectos en las vidas cotidianas de las personas a las que les son cada vez más negados los derechos. Quiero incluir aquí también que pensemos que otro sector muy avasallado por las políticas de Javier Milei son todas las personas con discapacidad en este país a quienes les están arrebatando todos los programas y políticas públicas que había destinadas a ellas, ¿no? Así que el panorama que tengo no es para nada alentador, pero que me parece a mí que es muy necesario que hagamos un ejercicio de pensamiento muy agudo, porque eso es lo que nos va a permitir, en todo caso, también desarrollar estrategias mucho más agudas, pensando, como dije antes, en todo lo que sí pudimos, porque creo que en parte estas reacciones son reacciones que tienen que ver con el poderío que construimos desde los feminismos y los transfeminismos.
Thank you so very much. This was really comprehensive, and Latin America is, from what I know, very interesting because it's very diverse in terms of political climate. It shifts, you know, it goes from right to left, and it also depends from country to country, from Brazil and Mexico and Argentina and Chile and so forth. So it's really, one cannot say, you know, this region is like this, which goes also for many other regions. But you summarize it very well. Thank you once again. And I wanted to say that there are some very important buzzwords. We will come back to who they are targeting in this sense when we talk especially about reproductive justice. And you already mentioned people with disabilities, which is very inclusive. And thank you for speaking that out. Not many feminists work on that issue and talk about that issue. And I loved when you said how rage moves us. So sometimes rage is good, especially for feminists, you know. And there's just recently, I was reading the feminist book, which said, why do we feminists always have to pretend and be nice? Why can't I just be an angry feminist? You know, yes, I can be both. But we will come back to that. Now I would like to introduce everybody, our second speaker. Now we go to Germany, Lena Dahm, who is a German feminist, journalist, podcaster, and who is actively engaged in analyzing anti-feminist movements and far-right ideologies. Based in Munich, focuses on themes like anti-feminism, anti-choice movements in particular, and the operations of far-right actors. Lena is known for her podcast, we will put it in the chat, Antifeministische Allianzen, which dives into the exactly networks, ideologies, and activities of anti-feminist groups, especially those who are opposing abortion rights. Lena's work highlights the alliances that are formed, and Ruth was talking about alliances that are formed by far-right and other conservative groups that promote restrictive reproductive policies. And Lena is using this online platform to bring awareness to the exactly strategies of such actors and to discuss the broader implications of their influence. What I would start with, you would also, Lena, I would ask you to give us a short overview of the situation in Germany, because from, of course, Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung is a German organization, and we also follow the politics, and our work is political and not only our lives. And what was interesting for me that, so Germany is also experiencing the rise of far right, right? Just like many other countries in Europe, and you also have it with your neighbors, and you know we have from East Hungary and Poland, and then there is some other flaws from the other side. And what was interesting is when I realized by reading that the leading actor now, AfD, Alternative für Deutschland, it's a relatively new party. So they're far right. So they're like far right. So they're around what, 10 years old or something. And for me, it was interesting as an outsider. And they're third strongest party in the parliament, if I'm not mistaken. And you also now have the new elections, early elections. You can tell us maybe more about that, but we'll come back to the current coalition. So my question would be, how did this right-wing shift happen in Germany? You know, many people from the global south look to the Germany as a very progressive, in many other things in rights. And then abortion is something that is as we take for granted, many of us, especially white people from Europe, we take that right is given, for granted. How come that this AfD and their collaborators, what was the process behind building such a strong movement so they could overtake the masses? That's something that I would be genuinely interested in. So how it came, because what was happening in the background, while we were celebrating parades and other things and achievements. So what happened?
What happened? Well, first and foremost, thank you also for the invite. I'm extremely happy to be here today with you guys and also get Ruth's perspective on Argentina and to think together, as Ruth just said. So I would look to that question from an anti-feminism point of view. And if we think back, or if we think about anti-feminism, it is, among other things, a movement against feminism. It opposes calls for sexual, bodily, or reproductive autonomy, the calls for equal rights for the LGBTIQ community, or gender concepts in general. These calls have become louder in recent years, and hence the backlash. So while feminists are definitely working towards a society where we can be different without being afraid, which is something Adorno said and which I find really smart, anti-feminists either want to cement the status quo, which is a patriarchal society, or like we're seeing in the US, or many other regions of the world, as we just heard, they even want to turn back the time. And that shows that anti-feminism is not just a counter movement, but it's also in itself an ideology that is based on inequality by stating that men and women don't deserve the same rights at the end of the day. So your questions are, how did it happen? So when we look back in history, we've seen that in tougher times, so times of war, of economic crises or financial crises or social upheaval in general, people tend to turn towards authoritarian answers. It gives them a sense of security, and unfortunately, that is something that we're seeing right now, or have been seeing, at least in Germany, since the 1990s, I would say. The sociologist Rebecca Bloom has published a book on those developments from a feminist perspective as well. And it is a German title. I don't know if it's been translated. I would loosely translate the title into Fear of Losing Supremacy. And it's about male supremacy at the end of the day. So anti-feminist activists started to push back on developments like, for example, that raping your wife became illegal in 1997 in Germany. And for anti-feminists, that was a clear sign that these feminists are going too far, right? We always hear that you're going too far. Everything that comes now, it's just going too far. So I deliberately chose this example because we just talked about this. A potential candidate for German chancellor in the upcoming elections in February is Friedrich Merz from the Union CDU, Christian Party. And back in the 90s, he was part of the parliament, and he voted against the law that now criminalizes rape in a marriage. So fun times when we think about that. This guy was probably going to rule Germany for the next year. So let's see if that's going to happen. And around the turn of the century, we see that anti-gender and anti-feminist alliances formed. The thing that sort of glued them together was their opposition towards gender concepts. Gender became the thing that brought different actors together that formerly wouldn't necessarily collaborate. So we've got the Vatican, we've got different religious actors, we've got politicians, journalists, and so forth. And over time, they filled the term gender with everything that they oppose when it comes to gender equality. We have in Germany, we've got this thing of educating young kids about what is okay and what is not okay. So if adults can touch your body or not, and they call it Frühsexualisierung. It's a very coined term. It's about that educating kids about consent, for example, is sexualizing them as in an early age. So that is something that sort of came along with this gender mania, I would call it. And that was really successful because gender is something that is rooted very, very deeply in our identity. It is an emotional topic and therefore an easy playground for populists of all different sorts. It is a bit of a different thing when we look at reproductive rights. In Germany, we're looking at over 150 years of abortion bans. Abortion is still illegal in Germany, and it's only not prosecuted if you stick to certain rules. And it is an easy playground for populists because barely anybody has the guts to actually touch the law, among other things. Also, pro-choice protests or pro-choice actors and demands in general have been pushed back vehemently and partly violently in the past. And it is also an easy playground because we do live in a society where a large portion of people believe that women are just too emotional to make the decision for or against a pregnancy, which is utterly sexist. But I think that would sort of sum it up at the end of the day, why we're not further in this whole process, I think.
Thank you. And you also mentioned a few very important things. And I know, and I read some of your blogs, and you really go deep and watch them. And I don't know if anybody realized that we call this series Anti-Gender Agenda, exactly for this reason, because they keep calling everything that we do, the feminist progressive movement or equality movement or social justice movement at the end, they call it gender ideology or agenda. And this is exactly why we chose that title for this. So what I see, it's the same, and it goes with authoritarian powers, is the sense lack of security, the socioeconomic issues, and then it really very goes easily to use the very common playground. And that you mentioned this for your potential, or for German potential new chancellor. I was also surprised when I read that previous chancellor Angela Merkel from also CDU, CDU party, in one of the votings, she was against the gender quota in parliaments. So Angela Merkel is a woman, you know, so some things are really hard to comprehend, having in mind in the century we live in, but still, you know, and then again, we see regression happening. What I'm
just going to quickly jump in because she's been asked in the past if she considers herself a feminist, and she said, no, definitely not. So yeah, just because there's women in power doesn't mean that everything gets better, unfortunately. So yeah.
Exactly. And that's a whole another debate. We also debate on those issues. But yeah, definitely true. Now, what I was also reading and researching, and I will go back to Ruth now, and what we see the connection between the countries or the regions in the world is when the socioeconomic issues are rising, or problems, you know, when there's inflation, etc., you know, then these conservatives, they strike upon women's rights, reproductive rights, LGBTIQ plus human rights, etc. But there is one difference, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I saw, it was very interesting for me, that Argentina and Latin America is very much influenced by the, of course, Roman Catholic Church. And even though the abortion law was adopted, still the majority of Argentinians, if I'm not mistaken, and I found a quote that says that 50 to 60% of Argentinians opposed the bill. So the overall sentiment of people is against abortion. So it also shows us that the sentiment is not always equals the law, and we need the law in order to regulate, to enable human rights. So I would like to ask Ruth, having this in mind, this overall sentiment, how do you then mobilize the masses? What strategies do you use, and to tell people, okay, we have to fight for this cause. Maybe it's not for you, but it will be for somebody else who will be in need of this service. You know, it can be young girls, it can be sex education, it can be, I will give you just a small, simple example. When I go to Pride, for example, and some of my friends say, you know, well, I don't go, you know, it doesn't bother me. You don't go to Pride because of me or because of LGBTIQ plus people. You go because it's still a protest in this part of the world. Because first comes gays, and then comes reproductive justice, and then comes women, and you know, how do you dress, what do you do, how do you talk, etc., etc. So I'm going back to the question to Ruth, and as such a sensitive community, very ethically and morally organized around the church. How do you mobilize, and what are your feminist strategies? Because you were part of the movements in 2000s when they were the green handkerchiefs. We also have them here in our office. What strategies did you use before adopting the bill in Argentina?
Bueno, muchas gracias. Y pensaba cuando le escuchaba a Lina también sobre las conexiones con Argentina, ¿no? Hace pocas semanas la vicepresidenta de la Nación organizó un seminario en el Senado de la Nación llamado Género e Identidad, el problema de la sexualización infantil. Y justo lo que abordaron, según estas organizaciones, son las de la hipersexualización infantil, el daño psicológico que puede acarrear, la detección temprana de la disforia de género acelerada y el derecho de los menores y sus padres, siempre hablando de padres, en el contexto de la ley de identidad de género, ¿no? Esas vinculaciones, casi hasta con las mismas palabras, esa expresión Digo, ahí en todo lo que hace a temas de educación sexual integral, como tenemos en Argentina, me parece que hay un ataque desmedido en estas últimas semanas, incluso con organizaciones que están haciendo denuncias penales contra directores de áreas de educación por los textos que circulan en las escuelas, como es en provincia de Buenos Aires, ¿no? O sea, la ESI es un blanco de ataques de estos sectores. La ESI le llamo a la educación sexual integral. Y ahí me parece para vincularlo con la pregunta que hacías. Por un lado, es así, la Iglesia Católica tiene incidencia en distintas capas en nuestro país, pero a mí me parece que los sectores que más han avanzado en términos de adhesiones sociales populares son las iglesias evangélicas y toda la organización que desde allí se están dando, ¿no? Es un fenómeno que también digamos, nos afecta en este momento en este país. Y son justamente esos sectores los que cuando en 2018 el Senado de la Nación Argentina no aprobó la ley de interrupción voluntaria del embarazo, es decir, rechazó la mediación que habíamos conseguido en diputados, los sectores evangélicos rápidamente se dedicaron a el espacio con mis hijos no te metas, que no es que en 2018, pero que en Argentina tomó fuerza. Y yo digo, ¿por qué tomó esta fuerza en ese momento? Porque estos sectores, los sectores conservadores, creo yo, sacaron conclusiones. El proceso de movilización social que llevamos adelante en Argentina durante 2018, cuando se abre el debate por el aborto legal, fue un proceso profundamente intergeneracional. Fue un proceso donde las jóvenes, los jóvenes tuvieron un protagonismo muy importante y un protagonismo, a mí me gusta pensar en la intergeneracionalidad como modo de expresión, también como un fenómeno, y quiero ligarlo. Ese protagonismo para mí fue posible, colaboró enormemente el proceso desarrollado durante años en las escuelas, en las instituciones educativas, con la educación sexual integral. Esto quiere decir que la ley que se aprobó en 2006 de educación sexual integral se llevaba adelante en todos los términos que la ley promueve, no. Pero sí la ley algo hizo. Instaló debates en las instituciones educativas que sin ellos es un poco pensable el proceso de la marea verde. Eso quiero decir, ¿no? Como aún con todas las críticas que tenemos, quienes nos dedicamos a temas de educación sexual, a las deudas que hay en relación a esta ley, me parece importante destacar otra vez qué provocó la ESI en términos de construcción de subjetividades, de otras feminidades, de otras masculinidades también para la expresión callejera. ¿Y qué nos dio resultados como estrategias? Creo que muchas cosas, pero entre esas cosas dio resultado la persistencia, nos dio resultado la persistencia, nos dio resultados ser un movimiento que buscó dialogar con sindicatos, sectores comunitarios, con instituciones educativas, con universidades públicas, con el movimiento de derechos humanos. A mí me parece que en 2005, o sea, hace 19 años, ¿no? Cuando creamos la primer reunión de la campaña nacional por el derecho al aborto legal, seguro y gratuito, cuando nos juntamos 70 personas de distintas organizaciones y dijimos sí, que verde, no teníamos la menor idea de que se iba a convertir en un ícono, en un símbolo en la región de América Latina y en otros países del mundo. Un ícono, un símbolo que es mucho más que aborto legal. En Argentina, ese pañuelo en la mochila, ese pañuelo colgado en las oficinas, en las carteras, ese pañuelo representa que ahí hay una compañera, que ahí hay alguien en quien te podés sostener. Ese pañuelo politiza el aborto porque lo saca al escenario público, ¿no? Entonces, quiero decir que la campaña persistió, este movimiento persistió, armó argumentos, revisó las propias argumentaciones, provocó un debate social muy importante y a la par de eso creamos muchas redes. Para mí, el gran aporte también que hicimos al debate por el aborto legal estuvo de la mano de quienes acompañamos las decisiones de abortar, ¿no? De las redes de acompañantes, porque las redes de acompañantes en Argentina desclandestinizaron el aborto cuando salimos a decir somos acompañantes. Este mes acompañé a 10 personas. Cuando producimos estadísticas, cuando contamos historias, los abortos se hacen de historias. Y contar esas historias permitió, pienso yo, extender la sensibilidad despenalizadora. ¿Eso quiere decir que el 80, 90, 100% de la sociedad va a estar de acuerdo con el aborto legal? No, jamás. Es la piedra basal del capitalismo patriarcal negarnos el derecho a abortar, ¿no? Te puedo aceptar que uses método anticonceptivo, pero abortar es reconocer el poder que tenemos quienes queremos embarazarnos de decidir qué vida va a ser y qué vida no será. Es un poder enorme. Y yo a veces digo, hablando en los términos religiosos, nunca nos van a perdonar eso, ¿no? Es una piedra fundamental, es como el núcleo duro, digo yo, del patriarcado capitalista, racista, heteronormativo. Entonces, creo que también fuimos muy aguafiestas, y tomo de allí esta formulación de Sara Ahmed. Fuimos muy aguafiestas desde las redes de acompañantes de los términos en que el aborto era relatado, ¿no? Y eso no quiere decir que cambiamos todas las narrativas, pero sí instalamos otras narrativas. Y también fuimos oportunistas. ¿Por qué digo esto de oportunistas? Porque cuando Mauricio Macri dijo en 2018 que habilitaban el debate al aborto, no nos que fue una discusión, sí, tanto tiempo esperar y ahora abre la discusión este gobierno también autoritario, reaccionario, que nos estaba endeudando un montón. Pero fuimos oportunistas, dijimos, es ahora, abrimos una puerta enorme, enorme. Ahora, la marea verde 2018 también hay que con Ni Una Menos, 2015, el hartazgo a los femicidios. Digo, ahí hay que poder ensamblar las luchas que llevamos adelante para que luego pudiéramos conseguir la de 2018, aunque el Congreso de la Nación no terminó de aprobarlo. Y otro que quiero decir de lo que sí hicimos dentro de la campaña por el aborto legal es que activamos centralmente desde la coincidencia. Y eso no quiere decir que las más de 400 organizaciones que terminamos después siendo parte de la campaña hacia el final, ¿no? En 2018, 2019, 2020, 400, 500 organizaciones, personas a las que no conocíamos, que íbamos a una charla y decían, soy de la campaña, y decíamos, mirá, esto es un movimiento que personas desconocidas hagan cosas, nos escribían, decían, presentamos en la universidad el pedido para que el consejo directivo declare, bueno, todas esas acciones que se fueron haciendo, me parece a mí que estuvieron enmarcadas en la convicción de que teníamos un acuerdo y era sobre la base de los acuerdos, de ese acuerdo que era chiquito, miren, era chiquito, era una ley, pero era inmenso, ¿no? Y entonces marchar sobre los acuerdos y no sobre las diferencias. En socorristas, por ejemplo, cuando la red se arma, las organizaciones, parte de la campaña, hubo una discusión enorme en la campaña. ¿Por qué hacíamos esto? ¿Cómo vamos a hacer esto? Si nosotras queremos la ley, ¿no? Pero ahí dijimos, también queremos la ley, por supuesto que sí, que necesitamos la ley porque necesitábamos el reconocimiento del Estado. Estábamos ahí, reconocimiento y redistribución de bienes materiales para el acceso al aborto, ¿no? Entonces, siempre marchamos sobre acuerdos y esto no quiere decir que la campaña fue armoniosa, quiere decir que tuvimos una política clara de estar centralmente por esto, ¿no? A veces decíamos también en la campaña, sobrevivimos al lockout patronal contra Cristina Fernández de Kirchner en la campaña, que fue un momento muy difícil para este país, con los sectores del campo cortando rutas, diciendo que hacían piquetes patronal. Y sobrevivimos en la campaña. ¿Por qué? Porque pusimos en el centro no esas discusiones, sino lo que nos juntaba, ¿no? Entonces, me parece que eso es un aprendizaje muy importante para los tiempos que se vienen también.
Thank you. I wanted to jump in to catch this momentum because this is crucial, I think, for many of us. And this is also how I will now reconnect it and go back to Lena. You said, I'm also taking notes, of course. Thank you for mentioning the Green Scarf movement. And we were all, and now I'm even looking at your passion, and the whole world was looking at Latin American feminist movement, you know, with the passion and being on the streets. This was interesting what you said, that you spoke with opponents or authoritarians and to find some common ground rather than differences. And now thinking of the German context, Lena, so we're having half an hour left and I had many more questions, but I will try to do at least 2 rounds with you also so we can open floor for questions. And I see the chat is very well going on. So what I saw when I said that in Argentina in particular, this data that I found about this religious sentiment or moral or ethnic, in Germany, what I have found out is that there are 2 sides merging together. So on one side, there's Catholics, CDU as a political party, and then on the other side is AfD, who have, I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, because again, I'm an outsider, more problem with the migration policies. So it's more important for, that's why they're against abortion in Germany, because a white German woman should give birth to white German kids, which also reminds us, whoever knows the history a tiny bit, of the 30s and, you know, some very bad laws that were happening in Germany. I don't want to draw any parallels, but they're obviously strong. And my question to you would be, so that is obvious and we know it. Have you, in your research, found any anti-feminist movements? Because you said they were first and foremost anti-feminist and then anti-gender and everything else, that are united and that have these transnational connections with, for example, Latin America, because money flow is another thing. We know how much money is given to anti-gender movements. So if there is this relation from anti-feminists in Germany or Europe to Latin America. And my second question to you would be, do you think it would be feasible or doable to do what Argentinian feminists did? Is it possible to negotiate, even though human rights should not and cannot be negotiated, to try to find a weak spot, you know, with with the anti-gender movement or politicians, and to try to find a common ground, negotiate, to make alliances. These are beautiful examples with trade unions, with workers, with, I know Ruth was working as an educator, working with medical staff, etc. So who would be allies, and what would be the strategies for feminists or for human rights defenders in Germany?
So when it comes to your first question, when I look at those who oppose abortion, I tend to separate them in two groups. And in Germany, we have religious actors who argue that life begins at conception because God said so, we can't abort, even because it says so in the Bible, but the Bible was written by humans, so that's kind of nonsense. But anyways, that's one group. And then we have populist actors that use the topic to gain momentum, to transport probably other topics to get votes in elections, basically. The lines aren't strict, so we can't, sometimes the lines are blurred and they come together and they work together. But it just helps me when I look at those movements to sort of separate them and analyze them. So we don't have one common ground in that sense, but the result at the end of the day is the same. What differs is how they argue and how they act, and which ideology, apart from anti-feminism, sort of lies behind their fight against reproductive rights. So in a reduced way, while religious groups want to obey God and argue that abortion is sin, conservatives like the Union Party want to cement the status quo, which is criminalizing people who have an abortion. They mostly argue with human rights or laws, constitutional laws, and so on. And they apply that to unborn children, as they say. And lastly, we have the far right, like the AfD, who has a very high interest in sort of controlling how the demographic composition looks like, which is based on racism and ethno-nationalism at the end of the day. So we have to know that on the one side, we are rooting, or they are rooting, not we are, they are rooting for the so-called remigration, which is a term that's been coined since end of last year, I would say, which is a euphemism that means deportations and potentially violent expulsion of people that they say don't belong here. And on the other hand, they have a high interest in controlling who has babies and who don't, so who shouldn't reproduce. So controlling women and people who can reproduce is key. And even though the AfD doesn't explicitly write that they will ban abortions, I am sure that they will have the power to do so. If they have the power to do so, they will ban abortions, just as Ruth said. That's the first thing they're coming after, because they can't just lose that kind of control over our bodies, right? So if we think about the second question, what we can adapt, I think that's a very broad question. It's like, what can we do now with facing all of that is a very broad question. And I do struggle answering those sorts of questions, because I think it is the key struggle of feminist movements. It probably always has been. I'm not that old, but I think it always has been. And so far, I don't think that we have completely solved it, or we have to constantly work on that. The short answer would be, well, patriarchy, we should get rid of that every single day. It wears us out. It's very tough to sort of deal with it. And right now, I feel like a lot of us are tired. It seems that we are reacting more than we are moving forward. And well, when I see the results of the elections in the US, it is almost impossible to say that we are a movement that is sort of on a winning strike, unfortunately. Even though our opponents don't stop whining about the almighty feminism, I think that is sort of something that I just can't wrap my mind around. I do have some thoughts on sort of the why or how we could sort of learn from each other. But I'm happy to discuss, because I don't think that I have an answer to that. So while we have one global phenomenon, which is patriarchy. We also have always local implications that we have to work on and work with. So on a local level, like in Germany, we're fighting on many fronts. At the same time, I often have the feeling that we are being pulled into conversations that keep us from moving forward and keep us from building on the things that previous generations sort of fought for. A good example in Germany right now is the use of gender-neutral language, which is forbidden in some states. And it is well, at least in my non-feminist circles, that is something that people just get wound up about all the time and get really upset about. And while I think that language is important, I don't want to constantly talk about pronouns and stuff, but not talking about it means sort of losing ground. And this is a sort of a dilemma that, yeah, moving forward while trying to keep everyone on board is using up a lot of time and energy. At least that's how I feel about it. So you always have to make sort of decisions because we are not a large movement. Thank you, neoliberal capitalism. I think that is a main cause that we just don't have time to think about how oppressed we actually are. While this is true, I always root for taking a breather once in a while. And then I look back and then see the things that we have achieved, and we have achieved a lot. I take the time to get inspired by other social movements, like in Latin America, like in Turkey or Poland, or even Russia. I recently been to an exhibition in Munich on Pussy Riot in Russia, which is absolutely amazing and re-radicalized me. So seeing what's possible in a state like Russia, it's still possible. It's pretty amazing. We are all feminists. We mostly work on a local scale, but if you look closely, I see bits and pieces of a global movement. And even if we're not doing a demonstration on the same day, or we're not using the same hashtag or the same color of our scarf, what makes us a movement is our fight against a common enemy, right? It is patriarchy. We're working against patriarchy. So the short and the long answer is we have to fight against patriarchy, and that's sort of what brings us together at the end of the day. I hope that answers the question a little bit.
It does, and it gives hope. And as you said, there's not one individual that can have an answer. So I will do my best to give one more question for Ruth and one more for Lena, and then I will open floor because we have many questions arriving from the chat. But I also want to use the opportunity on this political level. You mentioned, and this is what I often, this is what we talk about in the office, or I talk with my friends, and I say, you know, I'm tired. We are tired. And my question to Ruth is, are we as feminists tired, especially you, Ruth, who have been through so many struggles for the past 20 years? And when we get tired, when we think nothing works, and Lena, yes, you're right, there are many achievements that we should clap to ourselves and our allies, so it's not only women or cisgender women. The question to Ruth is, how do we stay resilient? Have in mind the Trump won in the United States. And we remember from his previous mandate, there was this gag rule, which was, you know, dealt with Mexico, but in general, you know, how he cuts all the funds, especially the ones that go to climate change, sexual reproductive health and rights. So if we have this worst case scenario in mind, there might be, most probably will be, cut to funds. People are tired. There's socioeconomic crisis. How do we, as feminists, stay resilient? How did you go through? And what is it that we can learn from you and from feminists from Latin America? If it can be in 5 minutes, that would be perfect, because I have one more question to Lena, and I want to give the floor to people who came here.
Gracias. Primero, creo que, ¿quién dijo que iba a ser fácil? ¿Quién nos hizo creer eso? ¿No? O sea, me parece que esa es una pregunta que nos tenemos que hacer, porque en algún momento, cuando tanto feminismo nos trajo tanto bienestar, pienso que miramos solo la avenida, ¿no? En términos de todo lo que íbamos consiguiendo y quizás se nos... Bueno, a lo mejor no había otra posibilidad y es lo que podíamos en ese momento. No vimos todo lo otro que también se iba armando, ¿no? A lo mejor hay un poco de ingenuidad política en eso o la creencia de, bueno, un movimiento omnipotente que nadie va a poder con él. Yo no estoy cansada. Eso quiero decirlo también en términos personales. Creo que hay que crear condiciones, hay que crear las condiciones. El patriarcado crea sus propias condiciones y ahí armamos a lo largo de la historia de la humanidad las resistencias, ¿no? De distinto tipo, color, etcétera. Pero que nos toca crear las condiciones. Yo siento que no podemos darnos el lujo de esperar a que las cosas cambien. Sabemos que no es así. El movimiento es un movimiento profundamente revolucionario, transformador, y a mí me parece que algo para salirse de ese cansancio, que lo reconozco, por supuesto, este, yo acá lo veo más como aturdimiento, ¿no? Como estamos aturdidas todavía, pero me parece que parte de lo que hay que hacer es hacer el inventario de lo que sí pudimos. Porque si no nos amarramos a esas genealogías largas, 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 la frustración está a la vuelta de la esquina, ¿no? Entonces me parece que es importante eso. Yo estoy como muy interesada en pensar cómo armamos memoria, memoria, memoria. Los feminismos en Argentina no empezaron en 2015 con ni una menos. Ahora, ni una menos fue un punto de inflexión, claro que sí, ¿no? Entonces, ¿cómo ayudamos a construir ese inventario? Como esa ayuda quizás nos hace salir del aturdimiento al que pretenden los sectores de poder. Creo que como no es fácil y nunca fue fácil, hay que seguir hablando el lenguaje de los problemas, porque los feminismos hablamos, como dice Sara Ahmed, el lenguaje de los problemas todo el tiempo. Problemas, problemas, en términos de pensar el mundo que queremos. Y dentro de eso, creo que sí nos toca armar programas de acción más transfronterizos, programas de acción que construyan otras promesas de mundo. Hay que armar otras promesas de mundo, porque es como dice... Me permito un minuto leer esto de Butler en su último libro, ¿Quién le teme al género? ¿No? Hay razones, porque tenemos razones para tener miedo al mundo actual. Por supuesto, los desastres climáticos, las migraciones forzadas, las vidas en peligro y las pérdidas en guerras. Hay economías neoliberales que están privando a las personas de los servicios sociales básicos que necesitan para vivir y prosperar. Existe un racismo sistémico que se cobra la vida de muchas personas mediante formas tanto lentas como rápidas. Las mujeres, las personas de género no binario, trans, especialmente los de raza negra o piel oscura, son víctimas de asesinatos con mucha frecuencia. Ese mundo es el que queremos transformar. Y entonces sí nos da miedo, pero ese miedo no nos puede paralizar, ¿no? Yo creo que bien hay que amarrarse a las amigas, ¿no? Las amigas feministas que nos dan cobijo, refugio, con quienes armamos otras vidas posibles. Y lo traigo así porque creo que la cotidianidad también necesita de la construcción de cierta ternura revolucionaria, ¿no? Que nos haga sentir que en esto que parece chiquito estamos haciendo un montón, estamos haciendo un montón. Agrego que además de las amigas, el buen vino tinto siempre calma la vida y al menos a mí creo que nos hace pensar mejor. Por lo menos entre compañeras acá apostamos a eso también, ¿no? A generarnos momentos de alegría entre nosotros, momentos de... porque el feminismo también es de cuentas con el pasado, ¿no? Entonces, no somos una respuesta sensible a ese mundo horrible. Entonces, hay que creérselas. Digo yo que los feminismos nos la tenemos que creer más todavía.
Thank you very much. I admire your spirit, me personally. And now, Lena, with new technologies, younger generations, sometimes you're not always on the streets, but you fight a lot online, if I may call it a fight. You write, you talk, you have a podcast. My question to you is the same. How do you stay resilient, especially knowing the hate speech and hate attacks on social media, etc.? Where do you find strength? Is it a glass of wine or is it something else? And what motivates you to do? And if you have experienced anything similar in your work of digging into anti-gender actors?
My heart just really opened when I heard what Ruth said, and I completely share that vision that we have to create those moments of happiness. And I have to say that my circle of friends is my energy sort of thing. So going back to them and having that safe space is immensely important. For me, also important is that it stays interesting. And I think working on the anti-choice movement is very interesting because it's very diverse. You have to deal with several different actors, and it just stays interesting because there are a lot of developments. And if I think back for like 10 years, I think 10 years back, it wasn't as big. So not nobody, but a few people, at least in Germany, were sort of talking about the topic. And if I look back those 10 years, it's been amazing what has been changed over the past 10 years. So that sort of keeps giving me hope. I think everyone who works in that field knows that sort of keeping the balance is important for the mental health. I'm very privileged in that sense because I'm a white cis woman. I am able to look at the far right and other actors sort of with a level of analysis, so I can sort of distance myself. And if I don't put on an Antifa shirt, I'm sort of invisible, more or less. So that helps me to keep the distance and sort of keep sane. I'm also, as I said, very privileged because my family is my biggest fan, and my circle of friends, they always have my back no matter what I do. So that's, for me, it's a huge plus. And I'm privileged because I live in Munich and the mountains are near. So I don't drink wine, but I go to the mountains, enjoy the peace and quiet there. So whenever I need a break, I just jump on the train and go up the mountains and yeah, look down with a little bit of peace and quiet.
Thank you so much. Last year we had the whole series on the feminist solidarity and a world of feminist fractions. And I think this is exactly the warmth and the advices we all needed. I will go back now to some questions that I have received from the audience, thanks to Adna, our communication person. And if anybody else has something to comment or add, please raise your hand and then we can unmute you. The first question says, it's a question regarding the rise of the anti-gender movements around whether feminist movements have a communication issue. Are we not being, as feminists, I assume, inclusive enough with our campaigns and movements? And where are men in feminist movements? Whoever wants to respond to this, Ruth or Lena. So does the feminist movement have a communication issue? Are we not inclusive enough? Where are the men? Any thoughts on that? And it continues with, have we set the scene for the rise of masculinist movements and whose responsibility is to counter them? I will give you all a few minutes to take a look at the chat.
I can probably
Please.
start because I just had in the past year or past months, I had a few presentations and I feel like we as feminists probably do need to explain a little more and a little bit better here and there, because we keep moving forward. We are really sort of smart about the things that we talk about because we are dealing with them every single day. And I feel like sometimes I had the feeling during my presentations that not everyone is on board with everything I say, which is fine, but using language that people understand and can pick up is a very important thing. Another thought that I had was that we deconstruct a lot. So we deconstruct religion, we deconstruct gender, we deconstruct families, and so on. So, and in different difficult times, I feel like we also need to offer sort of something that is people can identify with, and we don't just like, it seems like we're destroying everything, but we need to make clear what we're offering. We're offering freedom to live in a world where we can all be different, right? So I think that is something that we need to improve on. And when it comes to men, I hate that question. um, but of course we need to bring them along. I mean, strict abortion laws will affect those, will affect the fathers as well, because they won't be able to fulfill their dreams too. So we definitely have to have them aboard. And there are allies out there that we have to keep and that we have to work with. Definitely, I'm not anti-men, but it's not my focus, to be honest.
Fair enough. I was just now rethinking of everything you said. If Ruth, you have to add, please do. There are so many important living names that are mentioned because we often look at the history. Ruth quoted Sarah Ahmed several times, Judith Butler. Lena was mentioning who has and does not have right to have children, which is the whole reproductive justice movement and concept by Loretta Ross, who is still, living Black feminist in USA. And this, lastly, what Lena said about inclusiveness is also how are we maybe struggling and being more fractioned. It also has to do with a lot with identity politics, and this is something we will discuss in our next series in 7 days. Ruth, would you like to add, where are the men in feminist movements?
Sí, a mí me parece muy importante lo que trae Lina. Creo que sin dejar de pensar que los feminismos tenemos un grado de radicalidad por los problemas que planteamos, que a veces, o muchas veces quizás, nos alejan de los diálogos que necesitamos hacer para hacer contacto, ¿no? ¿Cómo hacemos contacto con el mundo en general? Me parece que esa es una pregunta que nos tenemos que hacer los feminismos, porque no hacemos feminismo solo para nosotras, para estar bien nosotras, ¿no? No vivimos una vida feminista. Yo creo que la vida feminista se vive para cambiar el mundo y el mundo no lo cambiamos en soledad. Entonces, ahí creo que tenemos que construir paciencias, argumentaciones. Cuando digo argumentaciones no es explicaciones, 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 sino ver cómo justamente nuestros argumentos se traducen en la vida cotidiana de las personas como una posibilidad de solución a problemas. ¿Por qué es tan potente lo que hacemos las redes de acompañantes? Porque cuando una persona quiere abortar, aborta. Aborta con las redes de acompañantes. Eso tiene una potencia enorme. Hace con personas que quizás jamás estarían con una feminista. Me parece que también hay que ser generosas, hay que ser más como movimiento, ¿no? Si nos hace bien a nosotras, ¿por qué no queremos que a otras personas les haga bien? En ese sentido digo lo de la generosidad. ¿De verdad queremos feminismos en todas partes? Entonces, si queremos feminismos en todas partes y apostamos a eso, también tenemos que hacer lo que a otros movimientos. Cuando les decimos a otros movimientos que tomen nuestras reivindicaciones, nuestras agendas, etcétera, nosotras tenemos que también poder pensar que los feminismos tenemos cosas para decir sobre el extractivismo, sobre el saqueo en los territorios, sobre la economía, ¿no? Claro, pero a la vez es difícil, porque los feminismos venimos a decir, por ejemplo, que lo que toda la vida nos dijeron que era amor, es trabajo no pago. Es difícil de oír y más de soportar en la relación familiar, porque pone todo patas para arriba, ¿no? Cuando vos empezabas diciendo lo personal es político, y por supuesto que lo político es personal, es ahí donde los feminismos hacemos mella. Y es insoportable eso, es insoportable, ¿no? Entonces, ¿cómo combinar esa insoportabilidad que traemos a la vida con el deseo de estar en todas partes? Y ahí dialogar, dialogar, dialogar. Por último, los varones, especialmente los amigos, los que se sienten interpelados, los que dicen sí, la verdad que tienen razón en esto, en aquello o en aquello. No tienen que acompañarnos en las luchas, tienen que sumarse a nuestras luchas, esa compañía de te acompaña no alcanza. Tienen que salir a gritarle al mundo que hay una mascota que les da vergüenza. Tienen que hacerlo, tienen que hablar ellos. El lenguaje de los deconstruidos no alcanza con que se hable entre dos o tres que sufren un poco porque tienen una compañera feminista, ¿no? Ya sea de trabajo, afectiva, amante, lo que sea. A mí me parece que parte de las deudas que hay para cambiar este mundo es eso, que los varones que aborrecen a los femicidas salgan a decirlo, digan que eso les comencé a decirlo públicamente, agencien eso, porque no alcanza con lo que hagamos las mujeres y las disidencias de género en relación a hablarles a esos que generan violencia, opresión, discriminación. Tienen que desacoplarse, los varones de construir, que desacoplarse públicamente.
This is powerful. It was phenomenal closing. I will, first of all, thank everybody who joined us and stayed for an hour and a half. I know it's late in some parts of the world. It's end of the working day in some others. Thank you so much, Lina, for coming. I know you have to rush further, but still don't leave. And muchas gracias to Ruth. I'm always inspired with the feminists. Before we leave, in one sentence, I'm asking you, what is the first thing each of us should do next? What comes to your mind? In one line. The mic, Lina. Have a glass of
I'm
water.
still thinking.
It's
hard. It is probably what Ruth mentions. It is about empathy. It's about not losing empathy and yeah, start fighting, start resisting.
Start resisting, small steps. Thank you, Ruth. What is one thing?
Sí, yo creo que hay que revitalizar mucho más las redes, ¿no? Que es tiempo de eso, aunque parezca enorme, pero me parece que sí.
Thank you all so much. I'm thanking my team, our communications person, Adna, Daria, our head of office, under whose leadership, feminist leadership I am, and my other colleagues here. Thank you all for coming. See you in 7 days, same time, same place, where we talk about reviving queer rights. So this was reviving reproductive justice. We didn't give up. We're not going anywhere. Anti-gender is not going anywhere. Thank you once again. You can reach us via our emails. This is recorded and we will discuss later on, but so far as you know, it will be published in YouTube videos. Spread the message, stay resilient and resist. Thank you all so very much.